I'm finally doing this. I want to do these basic, intermediate, advanced courses, kind of like small tutorial videos for Davinci Resolve, and I know many people have a very hard time of getting into it. It's intimidating. It does look a bit scary, but trust me, it's not. And this is going to be really helpful to kind of start with what all this is. So just coming into DaVinci Resolve, this is when you open it up, this is actually the first screen you see. And this is where you could just easily drag and drop all your videos, just like open up a Explorer and just drag here. And this is where you kind of put them. There is this media space where you could organize and kind of like from here get your clips in here, but I suggest just like where the screen is, just drag and drop here. You could easily make new folders, just like Premiere users are used to the folders. It's just like you could just do folder, drop, that's it. But at the same time, you could do is keeping in mind it still does not look the way you're usually used to NLEs, which is either Final Cut or Premiere. That's where this edit tab comes in. Place another clip on top of it is very much like Premiere and the layers and all that kind of stuff. You have your timeline. This is timeline 1. I could just make another timeline 2, and just maybe have start working on this, and you see there's a check mark, meaning that this is what I'm working on right now. People usually use other softwares to edit their stuff. I would go in another video on how to export your timeline from Premiere or Final Cut through XML, and then getting that timeline here without really exporting anything. So wait for that video. It's going to be a small one, but that's going to be an important one as well. Right now, I'll just take a clip and I'll just drag it on the timeline, because you need a clip in the timeline before you color grade it. And you see this is one of my previous projects, was called Putri. What I like is there's a lot of contrast. What I mean by contrast means there's a significant different color here. There is the sky, there's the darker areas, there's a bag here. In terms of color, in terms of contrast, dynamic range, that you have the information. Let's go step by step. So the first thing you see is the primary wheels here. This is where primarily okay, the wheels are gain, gamma, and lift, or it's the highlights, the midtones, and the shadows. So the gammas are the midtones, the lift are the shadows, the gains are the highlights, the offset is just everything. But we're gonna focus on but what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna try and make it as simple as possible with what these do. The gain is affecting the brighter regions of your image. The light areas, the sky, the bright parts. The lift is where the shadows are, so the darker parts of the area, like you see the bag here. If you adjust the lift, that's the first things that's gonna hit. You see the beard here, you see the black shirt, you see dark areas, and you notice when you change the lift, those are the first things that's gonna move. The brighter areas, you see the sky, that's first of all going to get affected. And then the gamma, which is the midtones, is kind of like the middle portion of your image. It's kind of like your footage, it has a midpoint to it. And usually these midpoints are skin tones, or let me just show you what it does. This waveform is going to be very helpful to see this, and I suggest moving forward, even in the upcoming episodes, you're going to see a lot of me using these scopes, which is the waveform, the RGB parade, which is red, green, and blue. It tells you which color is dominant over the other, and the vector scope, which is good for saturation. So I'm going to focus on right now the waveform. And what it tells me is I got all of this bunch of information. I got the top areas where the gain is, I got the middle areas where the gamma is, and I got the lift, which is, the shadows parts, which is the bottom of this waveform. And look what happens when I lift the gain. Which part of the waveform gets affected? See? You can look at the image, although it's very flat and lack of contrast because it's log. But you see when I jump the gain, it makes it brighter. It really affects the brighter parts. You see the shirt is not really being blown out like the sky, or the skin is not being blown out like the sky, or the rocks are not being blown out like the sky that much. So let me just reset it here. And now when I do something with the midtone, you first of all see like it's if I do it too much, it's still like not as bright as the gain. So you get an idea of the gamma, but the moment I do the shadows, you see it gets really dark. See? But the brighter parts are not getting affected that much. So just like that, if I bring the gamma down, it's still not as dark as the lift. So it's kind of like understanding 3 areas of your image: the brighter parts, somewhere in the darker parts below, and somewhere there's things in the middle. So what we gotta do is we need to maximize the contrast. First of all, before we move forward, you need to understand this. In Davinci Resolve, the whole system of color grading is not a layer-based one. This is a node-based system. Slightly different, yes, but trust me, once you get the hang of this, it's gonna be very easy to switch things on and off, and to kind of like check what affects what, and to kind of really control the image. So I'll start with the first one, the default one. And what I do is I just label this node label, and I just add basic. I just do that, and the first thing I do is I kind of mess around with the wheels. That's the first thing you should start off with. And you see the waveform, you see like I have no details lost. I go off the scale, and then it starts looking horrible. So I don't want to do that. I want to keep in mind what the image allows me to do, that it looks natural and it doesn't look crazy. So I think I'll go with something like this, slight. And to be honest, cinematic color grading does not mean you push things too far. You're subtle with things. So it's the subtlety, it's the finer details, it's the calmness of how you use the controls. So I would kind of like not touch the gamma right now. I would actually touch the lift, and I would stretch that waveform. I would bring the lower part of this waveform down enough that I don't lose too much detail. Otherwise, if I go crazy, and this kind of starts happening. So I don't want to go off the scale, but at the same time I want to keep looking at the image. I want to see like the darker parts still have the detail. I don't lose detail anywhere here. I still want that. Then at the end, I kind of mess around with the gamma, and I kind of see that I don't want to do too much with it again. It looks good. Why it looks so easy with so little changes? And that's where my advice is, that the better your shot is exposed in in production on set, if you've exposed your shot correctly, in the case of log, you have to kind of expose it 1 to 2 stops above, and to kind of like avoid shadows and the noise, but it still protects highlights. So it's like for Sony it's S-Log 2-3, for Panasonic it's V-Log, for Canon it's C-Log, so you get the gist of it. So with log, it does give you a lot of latitude that standard picture profiles just don't. So what I'm going to do is now I'm going to add the second part, saturation. So I'm going to increase that, and I'm going to see where it kind of is pleasing to my eye. It's something that's not too drastic. It makes sense. Otherwise, you go crazy with it, and it doesn't look that bad. It's it's my choice that I would want to have it somewhere here. I want to see the vector scope, and I want to see that, oh, the vector scope stretched out. So again, I could do Command D and enable disable, and you see that even the vector scope is showing colors. This is not, I would say, not a grade yet, but it is definitely standard enough that I could say it doesn't look as bad as the last one. I would go to this part. This is called the curves, and this is very powerful. This is even more powerful than the wheels. It takes some getting used to on how the image gets affected when you use curves. So if I like add some points to kind of change this curve up, you could see like the way it changes. Like any part I do from here, it's like this could be the gamma, this could be somewhere at the left, and this could be the highlight, and when I shift it, it does just that. It changes the brighter parts. This changes the kind of like the gamma area, and this changes the shadow area. And you could see instantly the curves do an amazing job at giving you that look. This is the hue versus hue. So what hue versus hue does is, hue is the color spectrum. So it's like if blue, green, and red, they're like they're hues. Hues is just another term for colors. But what happens is, if I change a certain color's hue, I'm actually changing that color to something else. So what I mean by that, I just make another node so that I don't do everything in one node. So that's kind of how nodes work. It's kind of like, now I'm adding a layer. So now it's Option S, and that I would label as, I want to change the shirt of this character. And what happens is that once I've gotten this node, whatever I do on this is on top of the basic node. So my basic node does not get affected. Whatever I did with the basic stuff does not get affected. Whatever I do after it, now that's what's going to happen on top of it. So think of this as the top layer. So with the hue versus hue, it's kind of like you see this eyedropper type icon, and this means they're going to select something related to color, something related to what's on the image, and you're gonna select it in such a way as I'm just gonna click on the shirt, and suddenly you see a dot comes in somewhere in the blue where the shirt is. Now in the hue versus hue curve section, when I told you hue is color, and when you change something in the hue versus hue, yes, the color would shift. So the color is gonna shift. Either I do from here, or I just hold this and I bring it up, and you see the shirt starts changing. And I could even like finesse it a little more even, is to just widen the blue so that the selection is grabbed more, and kind of just try and get more so that you don't see like half is changed, half is not changed. You kind of like, you could expand the color selection that it should collect more of the blue that was previously on this shirt, that is now changed to kind of like a teal. And this kind of gives me like a very clean change of a color without destroying the image, without really doing much except just click on a color and just shift it. And you could see the before and after. It's a huge difference. So I'm just gonna move on to the next one. I'm just gonna reset this. And the next one is hue versus saturation. Okay, whatever color you pick, you decrease or increase saturation. Remember, hue is color. So hue versus saturation, meaning whatever color you choose, saturation you're gonna change. The last one was whatever color you choose, hue you choose, you're gonna change the hue. So just like that, I pick the color of his shirt on this one, and then I just either I increase from here, or just I kind of like push it, and then look how the blue pops out. It pops out cleanly, even the bottle caps, because that's blue as well. And that is where you can now change the saturation, whatever looks well. So again, these are controls for you to creatively use as you wish. So I'm gonna move on to the next one, and this is the luma. What's luma? Luminance. Luminance, brightness. So whatever color you choose, you brighten it up or you darken it. So again, the shirt. The shirt's the outstanding color. It's easy to pick. It's easy to do that. In the next videos, I would go to more complex things to choose almost anything based on how bright it is, how dark it is, what color it has, what saturation level it has. That's a little bit more advanced. I'll get to that in future videos. Just again, pick the color of the shirt, and I'll again increase or decrease, and you see the effect. You see that that color gets either bright or dark. Again, remember, don't go too crazy on any of these controls, otherwise you won't get a good enough grade or a good enough color at all. It would just look chummy. So what I could do is like slightly brighten it. I could just go back. I would want it to be slightly saturated as well, and I want that teal type effect, so I would shift the hue to something that is more teal like. And yeah, I got like a shirt change that is just, it's standing out. It stands out and it looks good. And pretty much, you know, these are like small things. Maybe I want to increase the sharpness, the detail. In Davinci Resolve, you could do that. You could go here, select sharpen, and you could like go down, and it you know, sharpening really doesn't ever really look that good ever when you do it too much. So you either you do it very less, or you just, in my opinion, even don't do it at all. But there's another way of sharpening things while still looking good. You go to 2 and you just increase the mid-tone detail. And again, don't go too crazy, just slightly. And what you could do is when you zoom in, you can see the effect. Go to 0 and just let me start increasing. I don't know if you can see the effect, but it's subtle, but it's good enough. It's something where I could just even label detail, and I could turn it on and off, and you see that effect. You see what it's doing. So you could get a lot of things out of all these controls if you know just how much you could push it. I'll just create a new node. I don't want to disturb my detail or anything here. I don't want to mix things up with it. So what I'll do is I'll start from the left to the right with 1. So this is the white balance. Okay. White balance is basically, it's like a quick one-click option to kind of correct your white balance of your image. So if you have anything in the image like a paper or like a color chart or anything that is pure white that you know should be white. After that, there is this button. You know, to be honest, there are some things I would just stay away from. Like there's auto balance, and kind of like it does kind of like this kind of stuff. It kind of tries to expose your image in the highlight, shadows, and midtones itself, and kind of is destructive. Start with, you know, the contrast, and you know what it does. It kind of adds contrast to the image. And that kind of like is subtle. It looks good. The pivot is kind of like it shifts where the contrast gets affected. So if, for example, when you increase the contrast, you see the waveform, it stretches from the middle. It's like there's a stretch happening in the middle. So the moment when I try to shift the pivot somewhere and then do the contrast, now see where the stretch is happening. It starts off from a different point. So if I kind of shift, just increase the contrast crazy and then shift the pivot, you see from where it changes, that point shifts. So I would do is change the contrast like this, but then shift the pivot to see where I want it to affect. I don't want it to always stretch from the middle. After that, saturation adds color. And the hue is just changing like crazy level of like stuff here. It's like changing all the colors to different colors. It's shifting everything. So again, I would kind of stay away from that. Number two is, okay, these have some things for sure. This has the temperature, the white, it's like shifting the white balance. So it's like making it colder to the blue or making it hotter to the orange. It's kind of like just that way. Either going cold, going blue, you see minus 4,000 type. And then, 3,200, you kind of go to the 4,000 and you see the orange. You see the difference. This is good when you want to add a different look to your footage, that the overall atmosphere of it changes. But again, white balance usually when you change it in post, especially when the footage is not raw, it's even if it's log, it's still DSLR or mirrorless footage or even cinema camera footage if not shot in raw. The white balance is always baked into the footage. So the moment you try and shift this slider, this temperature, it does some crazy stuff to it. Again, you could do it subtle, but you do it too much and it just does not look that pleasing. Maybe it does for someone, but in my eye, this would look unprofessional. This would look like someone just cranked the temperature slider and just said this is a grade. You could sell it off as a grade, but to be honest, it's not. It's a cheap shot. Mid-tone detail, definitely, like I told you, is really good for adding that sharpness detail look without using the sharpening tool that kind of destroys footage. The color boost is very nice. What the color boost does is that it adds color to the parts of the image where they're actually less than the other colors. So it's kind of like you have an overall saturation level across your image, and then there are some colors just underneath that level. So it kind of brings them up to the standard level that every other color's saturation is. So it doesn't raise all the colors together. It kind of brings the lower ones a little up with the other ones. So it's kind of like, see what it does. It's adding that, but it's not destroying the image. It looks good. If you're going for that saturated look, it fits. It helps you. Again, this is not a very destructive tool as like an auto balance or kind of like changing the hue. So it's kind of like, again, use subtly and it could be very powerful. Use too much and again, even that could break your footage. The shadows and the highlights, straightforward. They change like the finer areas in the shadows. The highlights does the same. It brings down the highlights of like the finer areas, but rather not too much of the whole image. Again, these are tools. I think for a start, at least you get to know what these do. You see before and you see after. Let me just show you the start. So we did our basic. We kind of got it in where we added contrast and saturation. We kind of changed the shirt because, we wanted to pop out and kind of shift it. We added some detail using the mid-tone detail slider and not the sharpening tool. And then we added a secondary, which is kind of like changing a little bit of the temperature, again adjusting the contrast, again just kind of tweaking the part where you could add maybe a little more, less more saturation, kind of work with that pivot to kind of see where the contrast shifts in the image, and you kind of get this. And let me even show you a simple one, just this. And I'll just even play it, and you could see the difference of working with log footage and getting it to something that's reasonable. I still wouldn't call it a grade, but I would definitely say that it's somewhere. It's a starting point where you could jump off and do some more creative, good stuff. So yeah, this is my kind of like a basic long form style tutorial video of kind of getting into the color side of Davinci Resolve, using it for your projects. The next one that I want to focus on is, this was using log footage. How would you do this process with footage that is not log? So which is footage that is straight out of the camera. The videos you record in standard profiles or natural profiles, the ones built in your camera, and the ones where you don't have access to log, or maybe you haven't used log because it's scary. The second would be, how do I transfer my timeline in Premiere or Final Cut and get it to Davinci Resolve without exporting into the software? Thanks for watching till the end if you have, and wait for the next one. Subscribe if you haven't, because how will you know if I upload something like this? Thanks again.